What's your unique proposition? Although we like to avoid the language of competition because in the NGO world, we embrace the terms like collaboration, but it's still the principles that Boturana has talked about. What are you doing differently? You have to examine that. Hello and welcome to Impact Bureau, a unique podcast brought to you by Mayan Organization. Impact Bureau is designed for NGO leaders, executives, founders, members, and trustees. Think of us on Impact Bureau as your unincorporated trustees who give you real advice that you wish your real board coulda, woulda, shoulda. Hello everyone, welcome to Impact Bureau and thank you for joining us on today's episode.
Yes, welcome once again. We're so excited to have you on this week's edition of our podcast. And we're going to be sharing a lot of nuggets like we usually do. So stay tuned. It's no surprise that we are dressed in yellow.
Oh yes, I promise you we didn't plan it. This was a complete surprise.
But then, it represents joyfulness, energy, happiness.
Yes.
So
we're
really vibing towards, giving you a lot of nuggets.
Special. So once again, my name is Edem, and of course,
and I'm
Mo, as we love to call her. So thanks again for sticking with us. Impact Bureau has been going really well. We've been excited at the comments that you've been posting, and we love the fact that you're sharing. You're also watching
asking questions.
Yes, and even asking a couple of questions. We decided to therefore curate all the questions, or at least some of the very important questions that you've sent to us since we started airing Impact Bureau. And today's episode is dedicated to taking those questions. We want to spend time just delving through your questions and giving you the best answers that, we can come up with based on our level of knowledge and experience in running an effective organization also. So we'll go right into it. We've come up with 5 of your very, critical questions. They're the common questions that have come up a lot. And so we're taking them one after each other in today's episode. One of the first things that we saw common in many of your comments was, okay, you've said so much in the last 6 episodes and it's been really exciting. Can you summarize for us what essentials should we know before starting an NGO? A lot of you asked the same question. So basically, can you just tell me, what should I know? What should I have in mind when I want to start an NGO? Let me kick off by asking Motoraya this time around. I'm putting her on the hot seat. Motoraya, so everybody, our viewers really want to know, what should they, in summary, have at the back of their mind when they want to start their NGO?
Okay, so this is the part where you get to test whether I've been a good student.
Okay, exactly. Yes, let's test her now.
Okay. So from our conversation so far, we've discussed that you really need to think about your legal matters. You need to think about the legal matters. The first thing you need to do is register with the Corporate Affairs Commission of Nigeria if you are operating here in Nigeria. But before you do that, there are some things you should keep in mind. For instance, if you're starting out, you need to be able to know what do you really even want to do? What's the change that you want to see in the world? So that informs your having a vision statement. It also informs your having a mission statement, which you therefore derive from the vision statement that you've crafted. So what your vision statement should be communicating is, this is what the world would look like if you've maybe by the time you start implementing your program, or by the time you start working. Why would you come up with a vision statement? Because there's a problem that you want to address. Have you done research? Is there evidence that shows that there is a need and that the solution you are bringing in can actually solve the need? The community to which you want to impact or you want to solve their problem, do they really need that problem to be solved the way you want to solve it? These are questions that you need to answer first. Your needs assessment will do that. And from our conversation so far, we found out that a lot of NGOs don't start out even thinking about all of these questions before they start. They just launch into starting an NGO. So sometimes they don't even do a needs assessment to properly know how to handle situations. That's why we see that sometimes the interventions that people give to what they think a problem is or what the problem is might not really be what the most pressing answer to the people's problems. So I might think that pipe bomb water is what I should give people. But first of all, they want all their children to be in school because they know that education is the key to, bringing their families out of poverty.
Wow, I think we can put our hands together for Muturayo. So that was a really great summary. And I'll just cap it up by saying, yes, I think Mutura in her response has broken down some essentials that you should be, have at the back of your mind when starting out. Again, you have to find the problem. A lot of people start with finding their passion, and I have to correct that. So a lot of times I interact with NGO founders or interested founders, and they say, I love to teach. I love to give people things. I love to help. That's really nice to have that kind of virtue, but that's not really the starting point for running an organization. Identify the problem, not your passion. It's good when your passion is aligned with an existing problem, but the starting point is the problem. And that's where she talked about it's not only, sitting down in your head, anecdotally coming up with observation and say, this problem exists. You have to go and do the research. You have to make inquiries in these communities. You have to do the desk research. You have to confirm that indeed this is a priority issue, a need in this community. The people indicate that this is the kind of intervention they want, and this is the starting point. Secondly, I would also suggest that you find the right people. Because when you're coming up with this strategy, you're coming up with these interventions, don't do it alone. You have to form a think tank process, a process whereby you sit with people, reflect with people, get their suggestions, get their perspectives, get their insights. And in the process, you arrive at a vision statement, a mission statement, and a strategy unfolds. Another thing that's very important is for you to go and do the local research, because from moving to that mission statement and then arriving at interventions, it's going to involve a lot of, interactions, inquiries, research. We can't run away from that word. And this will help you identify or earmark specific interventions that you should then launch out towards. It's this early strategy document that you have in your hand that should then guide you to go to CAC. Some people would say, register your organization as the first step. That's wrong. In fact, in all our episodes, we shared examples of organizations and founders who spent about 6 months in strategic planning and reflections before they ever went to the regulatory body to register any organization. I recommend that as a process as well.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people will learn from this, because usually what I have heard a lot of founders talk about is that they register their NGO before even thinking. Some did not even know that they're supposed to have a strategy document until maybe.
Yes, exactly. And even in our previous episodes, I shared that I also fell into that common pitfall. I'm also somebody who registered before doing this. And you can course correct. So it's never too late to course correct. However, we're talking to people who have said, what should I do before starting out? So you don't need to make the same mistakes that many of us have made in the past. I encourage you to do that process of strategy development before you then take that information, and with that information, you go and register. If, however, you've already started, please use this information to begin to, regularize your processes. So now, having said that, now you've registered, what's the next step? You want to move into interventions. You want to pilot something. You need to then begin to do what we call budgeting and fundraising. This is another critical step in your existence or starting out as an organization. In fact, some would argue that before you register with CAC, as a derivative of that strategic planning exercise, you should have had a small budget and a small, fundraising activity carried out, because based on that fund you raised, that's where you would even get money to register or incorporate. But assuming you had some money set aside and you were able to incorporate, now to then do the next step of rolling out your intervention, you should then have a budget and be able to do your fundraising. And finally, go and start your project. Do that nice pilot intervention, evaluate it, and see its impact. Send that report, and let's see the growth of your wonderful, impactful organization. Moving again to the second question that was reoccurring in your comment section, and that question is simply, I've heard what you've said, and it's been very helpful. Should I then proceed to register or incorporate my NGO? In other words, you're asking us, is your NGO really necessary? Is it really necessary to incorporate another NGO? Mutwa, let's start with you. What do you have to say?
Okay, so if I can remember well some of the conversations we've had during this podcast, it will depend on the individual, the problem you're trying to solve, the research that exists, NGOs that already exist that are doing the same work, and the competitive advantage or different lens that you might be bringing into it. Is it really necessary? So those are questions you get to ask yourself. Is it really necessary for me to start an NGO? What is my motive for wanting to start? Am I just starting because maybe I'm hearing that it's lucrative to start an NGO. It's just the way that when you introduce yourself as an NGO worker, then people say, oh, she's earning in dollars, she's rich, she's that. No, that should not be the mentality. Am I really convinced that I should start based on the fact that there is a problem that has not yet been addressed the way that it will give a maybe permanent or lasting solution or sustainable solution. And I feel like if I come in from this lens, I have a competitive advantage over those who have been working in this area already. Because if you look at all the SDGs, there is no single SDG that someone somewhere in the world is not already working on. But if all the research that you've done or evidences point to the fact that if you should start your own NGO with this solution or couple of solutions that you have, you would definitely have a competitive advantage. You'll be adding more value to what the people in the landscape are already doing, then you can. But when you're answering the question of is there really a need, and all that you can answer is no, me, I just want to start my own NGO. Me too, I want to become a founder. There is scarcity of white collar jobs. Let me go and start my own. Then your reason for wanting to start is rather selfish than really wanting to impact.
Again, thank you for that brilliant, insightful response, Motunrayo. Clearly, you have a lot of experience in this field, and it shows. I agree wholeheartedly with Motunrayo in the fact that that question can only be answered by examining two key things. One, your motive, and second, the relevance. When we talk about your motive, why do you want to start an NGO? Why do you want to incorporate one? Is it because you're afraid of going into the job market and so this is the next best alternative? Or is it because, like she said, it's so attractive? A lot of NGOs seem to be supported by US-based organizations or global north organizations, and so they're earning in dollars, in pounds, and you also want to be able to ride, that
without knowing that you need to do
that white UNICEF looking jeep and going into communities, and that motive is questionable. So that's something you need to examine. Do you really want to solve a development gap? Do you want to address a development challenge? And do you feel that your skill sets and your commitment to being an NGO leader make you the best fit to then run this initiative, or make it necessary for then you to introduce incorporate another organization into the landscape? And secondly, the relevance. The relevance has to be something you examine very critically. When you say something is relevant, it means something is useful, is beneficial, it is needed. And that question has to be answered through a very intelligent approach. You've got to conduct the research. You have to inquire into the communities to ensure that indeed these gaps exist. These problems are not just fictional or a figment of your imagination, or they exist at population-wide level. Now, it's one thing for you to say, yes, I know 3 people in my church who cannot afford nutritional meals, 3 square meals. Is that enough reason to set up an organization to service an entire population? So your evidence needs to show that this is a population-wide problem. That is, this problem exists at population level. So this is something you need to establish. Secondly, the proposition that you're bringing, the proposal that you're introducing as a targeted way to resolve this gap. Is it proven? Is it established? Is it credible? Is it evidence-based? Does the evidence indicate that if these things occur, then these outcomes follow, such that you want to establish an organization as a vehicle to realize that transformation? These things are all the questions that occur when we're talking about relevance. So please, once again, go examine your motive and go examine the relevance. If you can establish or, affirm that these things are in the positive, then perhaps your NGO is due to be birthed, and it brings a unique proposition or a unique edge to the way others have been doing this. And, we can say that with your own approach, perhaps more positive outcomes will follow.
Achieved, yeah. All right, so the next question would be, how many trustees does an NGO need to have?
Yes, so this was another recurring question. A lot of people ask, so how many trustees should I have? And also, in fact, what kind of trustees should I have? Somebody said, my husband and I are the trustees in our NGO. Is that sufficient?
Just the 2 of them?
Yes. This was it. It was there. Didn't you see it? It was there in the comment section. So these are things that occur. One, I need to stress that the CAC, the Corporate Affairs Commission of Nigeria, is the regulatory body that establishes guidelines for the incorporation of your NGO. And at today, the minimum requirement for incorporated trustees is 2. Is 2. You only need to give the CAC 2 names as your incorporated trustees, and they will accept that. However, in our episodes where we talked about good practices, best practices, and the principles behind composing your board, we talked about things like it's important for you to have a diverse mix of skills, a diverse mix of experience, a diverse mix of even perspectives, and that talks about inclusivity. You want people with who bring in different lens into the decision-making process. And also, it's important when you're thinking to think about things like a quorum for meetings. So you want to guarantee that if we call a meeting, I will be able to achieve a majority, of people attending the meeting. And so the commitment levels of the people you bring into the board matter. So with that, I definitely, would recommend that you even look beyond just 2 as the minimum. The minimum is just the minimum, but you would have a more ideal situation on your hands if you can bring in people with experienced administrative, skills, abilities to fundraise on your behalf, a good sizable network they can bring for you. I mean, if you can limit that to 2 people, you're lucky. But if you can find that, you have more people in that consideration to offer, to invite, please do so. So the question that somebody asked about, my husband and myself are incorporated trustees. Is that okay? I think that when you set out, of course, CAC would incorporate you, but remember, when you're talking about an incorporated trusteeship or an NGO, you have multiple stakeholders, multiple individuals that you want to seek to partner with, and they're very interested in establishing your corporate governance systems and principles. A donor, for instance, might, find it questionable or some alarm to see that the people who are the governing body of the organization are a couple.
Not just exactly. It's not just that you're 2, but then also
you're a couple. Yes, because it raises questions about effective checks and balances. Who checks the other? If there's financial misappropriation, wrongful spending, how do you even approve the projects that you would implement in a year? Who checks who? So these might be things that partners might be concerned with. And also, even you yourself internally, you have to ask yourself, are you effective in checking each other? And so that might not represent an ideal situation. So I would recommend that you open up the board to bring in, external lenses, people who can actually, without fear or any conflict of interest, they can exercise due diligence as a governing entity in your NGO.
Okay, so someone also asked a question about what the ideal structure of a board composition would be, and I think it ties with the question you just answered.
Yes, thank you very much. And I know that a lot of NGO founders have that question because they ask, should I have a board of trustees and a board of directors and advisory board and all the different names of boards that you can think of? Again, it would come back to, I would reference the CSC requirement. Now, the way CSC looks at NGOs, we are incorporated trusteeships. So CSC is going to ask for names of a set of trustees. So in other words, automatically you are confirming that you have a board of trustees. By submission of those names, those people or individuals represent a small board of trustees who will act as, trustees for your entity to the public, and this is the arm that the CSC will hold responsible for the activities of your organization. However, we find that, in the typical day-to-day running of an organization, sometimes you need to separate or to make a distinction between those names that you prefer to CAC, who are people perhaps with, name capital, people who you felt that by giving them those names or publishing those names in the newspaper, remember that's part of the requirement, that the public would welcome this entity. But at some point in time, maybe you want a board that brings in more directorial, like maybe more input in terms of directing the managerial team, the management team, being more, attending more routine meetings, engaging more frequently. You want them to perhaps even, in your programs. So sometimes some organizations in their constitution, it's your constitution that would really detail the structure that you want to operate. CAC just mandates trustees. You can decide that in the way you operate, you're going to have 2 organs. You can decide you're going to have a board of trustees and then a separate entity called maybe board of directors. You can decide you're going to call them an executive committee. It's up to you to come up with the nomenclature. You can decide you want to have them as an advisory board. In other words, before the management takes any decision, they will refer to this advisory board, and then upon its approval, they would commence any managerial steps or whatever. So it's up to you, but it will be outlined in your constitution. Your constitution is the guiding principle for how you operate as an NGO. So that structure is at your discretion, and usually in your strategic planning process, at the beginning, that initial process, that ideation process that you embarked upon with all these other minds, you would have determined what structure works best for you. Some people might say, look, apart from the incorporated trustees we're going to submit, I want a board of public health experts, people who, when I'm going on the field to do, public health related interventions, we want this board to always, interact with our management, team. We want the management to always, reach out to this board. We want to have frequent meetings with this board so that they would be involved in guiding the policy frameworks, the program frameworks, even the budget frameworks of our organization. So again, it's at the discretion of the founding members of this organization, what structure you want to take. However, the minimum requirement is a board of trustees as incorporated by CSC. And the fifth question that popped up again from you all who have been taking your time to watch these episodes was this. You've said so much in your strategy, the episode on strategic planning and developing a strategy. I want to know how I can identify my unique proposition or my unique edge. What is that unique advantage that I will earmark as my organization's own unique way of doing this impact or making this contribution to ensure transformation? How do I identify it? How do I identify it? It was a common question. Yeah. How do I identify my unique proposition as an organization? What's right?
Again.
Over to you. What are your thoughts?
All right. So I think it still all boils down to your needs assessment, the research you've done, the fact that you've identified a need and the solution that you're bringing to the table. So when we say competitive advantage, that means something already exists that you need to compete with. And then the advantage part is what makes what I am doing better than what my competitors are doing. A lot of times, people who are founding NGOs do not see starting an NGO as real work or as real business, but that is exactly what it is. So any organization that wants to brew the same products that a drink that is similar to what an existing organization is already producing, we want to test this person's drink and see what can I do to improve it such that it gains market acceptance. It's the same way. Our market acceptance are the communities that we work with. So you need to check. I want to work in the area of education, for instance, and I'm working in Ibadan. What organizations already exist? What NGO organizations already exist in Ibadan that are working on education? What do they do? Who do they work with? If I also want to target marginalized children, then I'm zoning in my research to organizations who are already doing that. Then in my community, what is the need of marginalized children in terms of education? So is there somebody that is already doing it that maybe I need to bring them in if I want to start my own organization? If I know that I must start my own organization because I have the solution to their problem, then what am I doing differently that, makes it better, basically, or just adds to what already exists and solves the problem the best way possible. So, from the part where we were talking about strategy document, we talked about the programs that you want to launch out, the logic framework that guides it. If I do X, Y, Z, then this will happen. So that means if I do X, Y, Z, then I'm able to solve the problem in this way. Then what approach would help me to solve the problem? So I think the approach is what really matters here. So what do I want to maybe enroll the children in schools by myself? Do I want to provide alternative education materials to them or alternative learning materials to them? Do I want to start maybe a general, I don't know, maybe lessons, the way lessons are widespread now? Do I want to start free lessons, free home lessons or free community lessons where every child gathers under a tree and I'm able to teach them? Is that what I want to do? So really, it's just what is different.
Okay. Thank you again. Another very insightful response, and I just will add to complement that by saying again, when you're talking about what's your unique proposition, although we like to avoid the language of competition because in the NGO world we embrace the terms like collaboration, but it's still the principles that Boturana has talked about. What are you doing differently? You have to examine that. Remember, she said something in the earlier part of this episode that every aspect of the SDG has somebody working on it. Somebody's already doing something. So your goal is not just to come and litter the landscape with another activity, right? Your goal is to do something that actually leads to transformation and impact. So then what different thing are you doing? What different approach are you bringing in? The example she gave about education, for instance, you might say, oh, there's a lot of people trying to work on enrollment. A lot of people are trying to work on qualitative learning. I want to focus on learning outcomes, and my focus is on teachers. You might say people are doing, distribution of learning materials, supporting libraries in schools, supporting digital literacy, but not enough people are providing capacity development for teachers. That might be your unique offer, your unique proposition, your unique contribution. So that's the language you have to think about, and it takes you down again, like you said, to the research. What is already happening? It takes you down to the needs assessment. What is the problem? What are the solutions currently existing that are tackling this problem? What are the gaps that persist despite these solutions? And that's what would let you clue you in onto that unique, different offer that you should provide. And having said that, it would also take you to the domain of what are your strengths? What are your strengths? Because then remember we said, even though you must focus on the problem, your passion is not insignificant. If your passions over the years have led you to acquire a certain kind of skill set, that might be the unique proposition. That might be your own strength. You might have a unique ability to, facilitate trainings, or you might have a unique ability to conduct advocacy, or you might have a unique ability to do stakeholder management, stakeholder engagement. And so your own approach might be facilitating trainings, developing toolkits to support trainings for teachers. So your strengths are also tied into this aspect of what is my unique offering. So again, to summarize, you have to go back to the needs. You have to go back to a study on the existing interventions. Who is doing what? And then you have to isolate the gaps. Despite these solutions, what are the persistent gaps? Based on that, you then want to frame your own unique approach to that persistent gap. And based on that, you then want to identify your unique strengths that you bring to the table. And this will help you articulate your unique proposition or your unique edge in leading this transformation. So that's as much as we can take of this set of exciting questions that you sent us. We're so glad that you paid enough attention and you generated these questions. We also hope that our responses have given you more clarity on how to go about doing effective NGO work. We're going to wrap up now with final words. Motunrayo, what are your final words for our audience?
Okay, so for me, my final words would be, first of all, for you who wants to start an NGO or who is even already running an NGO, always check the motive. Be sure that your motive is positive, be sure it is right, and be sure that you're designing interventions that can actually solve the problems that you really want to see solved in the world. Then secondly, apart from what we shared, you can also do your own personal research so that you're sure that you're adding knowledge to what you already have. Then keep watching our podcast.
I like that one. Keep watching our podcast, and it's a perfect segue into my final words as well. I'll say to you this: if you're doing your work well, you should become obsolete. Yes, the goal for an NGO is to become obsolete in an area. In other words, by the effective, implementation of these interventions, the problem should be reducing or disappearing, making you obsolete in that area. It doesn't mean that you stop being sustainable. You should always run in a sustainable manner. And if you are monitoring and evaluating, you would know when that problem no longer needs your attention and you can pivot into another area. On that note, I'd like to thank you once again for tuning in. We hope that you've gotten the same value that we always get out of, running this program. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to share this podcast so that others can also benefit. See you next time. Bye.